Hi. So this is part 9 of the series, and today I'm going to speak about the idea of roles, the kind of roles we take up in life. After sending in the topic, I realized the word assume can be a little misleading. So here when I say assume, I don't mean making an assumption or a guess. What I mean is the roles that we take up and assume in that sense of the term. And while the idea of roles may border on the simplistic in that it's, as a concept, there is nothing, rocket science, there's no rocket science to it. But personally, I have found a lot of value in terms of consciously taking up a role. And it could be any role. It could be the role of a traveler on a local train to being a business partner to somebody to, it could be something serious as well. So far along the series, we've looked at various ways in which transformation can be caused for oneself in different areas of life in different ways. Some of the modalities we've spoken of are process-based modalities. Some of it looks at emotional shift, some of it is attitudinal. The idea of roles, in a great sense, is an attitudinal shift that we are talking about. So, what kind of roles are we talking about here? We're talking of all sorts of roles that we play. If I were to look at some very generic ones that all of us play, all of us have been a child of somebody, some set of parents, right? So the role of a child is something that we've all played. Most of us have also played the role of a professional in some way or the other. We've worked our way through lives. We may have played the role of a parent to our child, or perhaps a guardian to other children around us. We may have been somebody's partner, somebody's spouse. Of course, all of us have been friends to people. Other kinds of roles that we take up are, we've perhaps been a community member of our racial community, or let's say a building, apartment society, or various kinds of clubs or other places that we belong to. Right? So there are these various kinds of roles that we tend to play. But what I'm speaking about today when I say the kind of roles we assume, the kind of roles we take up, is slightly different. So I'm going to make a distinction between the idea of role playing and role taking. Okay, so two different things. So a lot of us play different roles, but not necessarily because we want to play them, but because we're expected to play them. Right? So I may play the role of a professional in a certain manner because my organization demands that I play it in that particular manner. Or I play the role of a daughter in a certain way because my parents expect me to play the role of that daughter in a particular way. Right? Am I completely authentic in my role playing? May or may not be. Right? Because at the end of the day, it's a play. I'm putting on an act, and I may not be completely authentic to that act depending upon how much I have actually taken that role, and hence the distinction between role playing and role taking on the other hand. A lot of times we don't actually take the role that we play. We don't assume responsibility of the role that we play. We play it because we've landed in that role for some reason, and therefore we are expected to play it. So the kind of the transformation or the shift that I'm talking about in the context of roles is through the idea of role taking. And therefore it's important to look at what are the kind of roles we take in each of these situations. So as a child, as a professional, as a partner, as a friend, as a society member, what kind of a role can I take? And there are some of those which I have listed. I may end up taking the role of a contributor in that relationship, okay? Which means, for example, if you're a friend of mine and I'm a contributor in that relationship, I actively look to see how do I deepen the friendship, how do I make sure that I bring value to your life, how do I make the relationship more meaningful. So I can contribute in very many ways. It could be contributing in terms of being there for you. It could be contributing in terms of things or money or service or any other thing that I can give you. Sometimes it could be in the form of a listening ear or a shoulder to cry on. So I could contribute in many ways. Right? So I may actively take on the role of a contributor. That's one possibility. I may also, in the same relationship, end up taking the role of an observer, which means I'm looking at how the relationship is going. I may participate in the relationship in the sense that if you, let's say, call me out for a movie or a coffee, I might come along. It's not that I don't do anything or I don't reciprocate, but at the same time, the stance that I take internally is that of an observer. In the sense I'm looking at, okay, let me see where this is going. I'll think about whether I want to invest in this relationship further or not. And if I happen to have taken the role of an observer in an unconscious manner, it's very possible that I may live out a lifetime of friendship in the observer role without quite knowing what I'm doing in the process. And while I'm speaking of this in the context of friendship, it could even be a very deep relationship like that of a partner or a spouse, and I may still go through life as an observer sometimes. Sometimes I may go through a certain role in the role of a listener, which means I'm there, I'm present in our conversations, in our interactions, but I'm not really speaking about what are my ideas, what's my intent, do I have objections to what you say, do I have questions? That doesn't quite come out for whatever reason. I may sometimes genuinely have nothing to contribute vocally and therefore I may choose to be in the listening role. I may sometimes have certain notions or prejudices about this person. For example, I may think this person doesn't listen to me or is too aggressive or too violent and therefore it's better for me to listen and not speak up. For whatever reason it may be, I may end up being in the role of a listener. It's not necessarily a passive role in the sense I really do listen, I understand what you say, but there is no feedback. So there is what happens in the process of taking on the listener role is that the other person ends up making a lot of assumptions about me. Because I don't counter vocally or I don't agree vocally in the relationship, the person may make an assumption that I'm interested, not interested, agree with him, disagree with her. All kinds of assumptions float, and there is a possibility that one fine day, if for some reason it crosses the threshold of my listening, that person ends up in a state of shock because he or she is in a state of assumption about what I am in the relationship. So a listener role is a huge possibility. Sometimes I may end up playing the role of a monitor in the relationship. And when I say monitor, it means that I'm looking at, oh, is this relationship going all right? Oh, no, it's not going all right. Let's sit and have a conversation. Let's work this out. So I'm looking at what's going right, what's going wrong, not so much being engaged and working with the mess of the relationship, but looking at it from a helicopter view and looking at, okay, is this equation going okay, not going okay, let's balance. In the process, I may be neutral, but there is a possibility that the other person might perceive me as being more of a course corrector than actually being engaged in the relationship. It becomes a very detached, unemotional viewpoint, which might work in certain roles, where, let's say, if I'm in a professional role of an auditor or something like that, I may genuinely need to be in the role of a monitor. But if I'm doing that by default in my marriage or in a friendship, then it doesn't quite work. The other person doesn't quite feel good about it, and the relationship doesn't grow in the direction that it needs to grow. I may also take on the role of an evaluator. And the role of an evaluator could mean I'm always looking at judging the other person in this relationship and looking at, okay, how is this person doing? Is he or she doing well for me? Is he or she doing well for himself or herself? Is the relationship working okay? So I'm always looking at, in a way, scoring, giving marks, grading that relationship, and looking at how do I judge the relationship and judge the person, and in the process, of course, give feedback, but that may not necessarily be what that person is looking for in the relationship. I may sometimes be in the role of a spectator. Right? which means I'm there in the relationship, I'm there in a marriage, I'm there as a parent, I'm there as a child, and I'm not doing anything. The other person is contributing, I'm receiving. If I'm asked to give something, I give. But that's about it. It's a passive role. Maybe sometimes listening, but not actively doing anything to grow the relationship or deepen the relationship. If the other person doesn't happen to be there in that equation, I probably wouldn't even notice, because I'm just being a spectator. And I may, for all you know, I may give lip service in terms of saying, yes, this relationship is important to me and you're precious to me, but at the same time, I'm not really contributing. I'm not doing anything that makes the relationship change or deepen or make it worse or any of that, just being very passive. Yet another role that sometimes we take on is the role of a performer. That of doing everything that I can do to perform, to make sure that this thing works. Right? I want to be the best mother, the best wife, the best daughter, the best husband. So I'm looking at doing everything that is by the textbook, by the script correct, and the best, in a way adopting best practices, so to say, so that I will be great in the role that I have taken on. Does the person need me to be great is a different question. May not need me to be this performer in the relationship. For all you know, that person may want me to simply relax and be myself, but here the performer role is something that I've ended up taking on. Now the interesting piece in terms of role taking here is that a lot of times role taking is unconscious. We are often very conscious of the role playing piece. So I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm a daughter, or I'm a partner, or I'm a friend. What is the role I've taken in each of these relationships? I'm not always aware of it. It's an unconscious stance that I take, and it's very likely that I might have a preference for one of these stances and I take on the same stance everywhere in my life. So if I happen to be a spectator in one area of my life, chances are I'm a spectator in most areas of my life. So if I realize, for example, that I've been a spectator at work, which means I wait for my boss to give me the next promotion, I wait for a certain role to come along, I wait for maybe a certain learning program to come along, then chances are I'm also that spectator at home, I'm also that spectator with my friends, which means there is a wait and watch approach to life in general. So I'm waiting. When life will happen, it will happen. If it doesn't happen, I'm where I am, life is where it is, and nothing moves. On the other extreme, if I happen to have a default preference for the role of a performer, I will go engage and be a performer in all areas of life. Whether it's feasible for me or not is not really assessed. Whether a certain relationship or a person deserves that performance or not is not quite assessed. The kind of energy that it consumes, and sometimes it may even drain me, that's not quite assessed. So the reason the idea of roles is very important in terms of making it conscious is because of this piece. The rest of it is really simple. It's about the consciousness of, are we taking on roles in a way that we know we are taking on. So what is it that I am in my marriage? What is it that I am as a parent? What is it that I am as a child, or as a friend, or as a professional, or any other space that I am in life? And it's a very interesting thing to observe and perhaps even journal for a few days, write out for a few days initially when we are becoming conscious of roles, because we realize that a lot of the stances that we take are absolutely dysfunctional. They may come from a certain past experience or a certain meaning we've given to situations in life in our past, but do those stances always work? Do the way we take roles by default always work? Is a huge question to ask. And the reason we're speaking about it in the context of transformation is because a simple shift of saying, I don't want to be here, I want to be here, completely turns around the relationship. It can deepen it in a way that we can't really imagine. And that's where I find value in a concept that is otherwise really so simple. So the primary distinction that I want to make here is the idea of role-playing and role-taking, and are we conscious? So what is it that influences the way we take roles? Not play, but take roles. A lot of it is an unconscious process. We may not always be aware of why we take on the kind of a stance or a role that we do, but some of the reasons that influence the way we take roles is, one, our self-image. I have a certain image of myself, and there is an unconscious need to protect that image so that people don't start thinking differently about me. Now, the image may or may not be good. In most cases we believe we are good, but it may or may not be good. It's just that there is a comfort in maintaining a certain image. So for example, if I believe that, let's say, if I believe, for example, that people think of me as this very gentle, soft person who's very approachable, if that's the self-image I want to hold on to, and for whatever reason in a certain relationship I need to take on the role of, let's say, an evaluator, and as an evaluator maybe I need to be critical of somebody, I may hesitate to take on the role of an evaluator because there's a self-image threat. I don't want the other person to think that I'm not approachable, I'm not just this gentle, soft person, and in the process I don't take on the role of an evaluator. I may end up being this very approachable listener kind of a person, but I'm not adding value to that relationship. That relationship doesn't work because I refuse to take on the role that I'm supposed to take on in that relationship. It becomes an extremely dysfunctional situation because I refuse to take on the role. The other reason why role taking sometimes doesn't happen is because of certain needs or wants that are sometimes met, sometimes unmet. So for example, if I have a need for belonging, a need for affiliation, and therefore I don't want a certain relationship to be lost, and at the same time the situation that demands that I take on the role of a critic and counter the person, perhaps even confront the person head on, I may refuse to take on that role of being a confronter because my safety, my lack of belonging gets triggered, and therefore the need for belonging does not allow me to take on the role that I really need to take on in order to be authentic and valuable in that relationship. Sometimes it's a factor of just the inner state of being, the psychology of us and what's happening in our psyche. In the sense that we may be at a phase in life where we are on a high, on a low, not wanting to interact with people, wanting to withdraw into a shell. And given that we are in these phases of life, we'd rather choose to interact with the world in a certain manner and not in a different way. And therefore, the dysfunctionality can set in if that inner state carries on for too long. It's like the analogy they speak about, when an emotion turns into a mood, that's when it becomes dangerous. Similarly, when an inner state becomes a state of being, then it can become dysfunctional. Sometimes what influences the idea of role-taking is the fact that we are expected to take on the role in a certain way by society, by the organization, by our family. So let's say if my boss expects me to be this submissive subordinate who agrees to everything that he or she says, then even if I want to take on a different role, that role taking may prove dangerous to me. It may prove very uncomfortable in the relationship or the equation that we have. And therefore, even if I want to take on a certain role, I play this meek subordinate because I'm not allowed to, or I believe I'm not allowed to take on the role. I'm thrust upon a very different role.
You're expected to.
Yeah, I'm expected to play a different role. And this very often happens in organizations. If there is still the possibility of confronting, it can get a little difficult in family situations where there's a lot of dialogue involved to be able to peel off that expectation. Because if I'm expected to be a certain way as a daughter, as a sister, as a wife, then it's a lot of dialogue to look at how do I shift that expectation. And of course there are situations that make us take on roles in a certain way. So for example, if let's say I have lost a parent early in life and therefore I've had to become the provider of the family at a very early age, I may assume the role of this provider, I may assume the role of this responsible person who holds everything together, because that situation in life demands that. But if I continue to assume the role of a provider everywhere in my life, across board, I might end up being a doormat, because I'm providing for everybody in situations that don't need me to provide and take care of people. So that's where the role taking becomes dysfunctional for me, and of course also for people around me, because they don't really want me to play that role. I'm forcing and thrusting that role upon them. So here's a video which refuses to play on this computer for some reason, but I'm going to describe what it says. So when we are speaking about the whole idea of role taking versus role playing, so what's the distinction between, what is that one factor which distinguishes role playing from role taking? What do we think?
Role taking is more of a conscious effort.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And role playing is going with the flow.
Yes. Sometimes not even going with the flow, but yeah, just being there because we're being dragged along. Yeah. Yes, it's very much a conscious effort. Role taking is a conscious effort. It is a choice that we have to make. And very importantly, one factor that distinguishes whether we have completely taken on a role or not is the idea of what in unconscious process work we call it self-authorization. Do I authorize myself to take on this role? Do I give myself permission? Do I consciously choose to take on this role of an observer, of a spectator, of a performer, of a provider, whatever is it that is needed in that situation? So what this video is about is, it's a video, a quick 2-minute compilation of weightlifters in the 1980 Olympics. And it's documented all the times that they've failed. Right? So the preparation is not different. They've prepared whatever they've prepared for the Olympics. There's years of training and all of that. They rub their hands, they powder their hands, they hold the weight, almost lift it, but it doesn't take off. And they've looked at the distinction between successful attempts and unsuccessful attempts. And the only distinction between failure and success has been that in that last moment when they are ready and holding the reins of the dumbbell, at some point, and you can see it in their eyes, there is that self-authorization says, I choose to. There is no distinction at all between the number of hours of training or their physical strength or their capability or skill or any of that, right? It's the same person with the same kind of, in the same category with the same kind of competitors. It's just that one moment of self-authorization which says,
No, you can't.
I lift. Now I can. And it's that simple, even with the way we take roles. The only trouble here is a lot of times we don't quite step onto the last mile. We don't quite get into this mode of self-authorization in a conscious manner, as he said. So there are a few questions that I'd like to leave you with. One is, am I aware of what roles, or authorizing myself in a role? And this could be any roles. I mean, look at, and you could start off with absolutely any role in life. That's the beauty of the process. You could take on, as I said, the role of a traveler in a local train, for all you know. Am I aware of what role am I playing as a traveler? Am I an observer? Do I wait to be pushed into the train? Am I lurking on the sideways? Am I trying to protect myself? What is it? Am I an aggressor? What kind of a role do I take on? And for all you know, I might end up taking that stance all around my life without quite knowing it. So am I aware of, one, what role do I take on? Two, very importantly, do I actually authorize myself to take up this role? Which means, have I consciously chosen to take on this role? So if I'm being aggressive as I try getting into a local train, have I actually chosen it? Do I want to do this, or is it a force of habit?
Sometimes you're forced to do it.
Yeah, and in that case, am I dropping that role also later? A lot of times the aggression that I carry while I get into a train remains when I get home and deal with my child.
Or it can be in some area I have frustration or anger,
Yeah.
and I am looking for some point to release.
Yes, and therefore again it's unconscious role taking. I'm not choosing to be aggressive, but because some other aggression has not been channeled, it's channeled here.
Or
Right?
somebody scold someone, so
Yeah.
chances he is below, he will scold.
Yes. But in the process, therefore, I'm not authorizing myself to take on that role. Somebody else is leading me all through life. And therefore, that somebody else may be leading me through all my relationships in life. And that's the danger of it. Right? That an aggressive boss may be leading me in my relationship with my child. Without my knowing it. Because I'm channeling the frustration towards the boss as a mother towards my child, and that's completely unwarranted. And I've not even perhaps authorized myself to take on that role as a mother, but that's what I'm doing.
It's something that
Maybe,
It's not even forced, it's something that I'm doing unconsciously.
yeah, maybe like choosing to be boss at home.
Yeah. I mean, I'm compensating for it one way or the other, but it's in the wrong situation, in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And therefore, the kind of relationship that I need to establish with a child is not established because I'm dealing with a child as somebody who's a substitute for this boss that I cannot hit back at. Right? And the child doesn't really know where that comes from. From the child's perspective, I'm an absolutely useless mother because I'm not really playing the role that I'm meant to play because I'm playing it unconsciously. So the question, and it's a simple but a very powerful question to ask ourselves, think of the kind of roles we take on. Do I authorize myself to take on that role, or do I just happen to be playing that role? And if so, what's the danger of it? And that's the second question, therefore. What's the impact of playing a certain role unconsciously? Look at how am I, as a family member, as a society member, as a traveler, as wherever I am. What's the impact of me playing my role in an unconscious manner? And yes, what you brought up about, do I also drop roles when necessary? A lot of the times the unconsciousness comes in because I don't drop roles, I forget to drop roles.
you need to.
Yeah. So it's as simple as saying, let's say, am I a cook in my bedroom? I have to be a cook when I'm in the kitchen, but if I'm at my work desk or in my bedroom, if I'm continuing to carry the role of a cook and therefore measuring everything and making sure everything is clean and orderly and all of that, then it's not really working because I'm not doing what I'm meant to do at my work desk or in some other place because I'm still wearing the hat of a chef. So can I take off hats even as I choose to wear different ones? And if I don't drop the roles that I have taken upon once upon a time in life, what's the impact of that in my life today? So very simple questions to ponder over, but very powerful.
No, that means it is changing the course of your life.
Absolutely. And that's the point of the transformation piece here, that it really shifts gears, it shifts relationships, so long as I'm aware of what's the role I've taken on in life. And the universality of it is astounding sometimes in terms of how a simple event in life can give me a clue. A simple chai with my friend can give me a clue about how I take on a certain role. Right? And how do I therefore do everything else in my life, and what is it that I need to shift, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, we have, that's why forces, counter forces to balances. Forces can be people around us in our life or surroundings. Like, so it's to balance, to show. Sometimes we see, there's a lot of reflection we see. Sometimes in movie part also, or sometimes,
Yes.
as you stated.
Yes, the world can often mirror it for us, but if you're willing to listen, if we are conscious about it, ultimately the whole idea of role taking has to come from us. We have to authorize ourselves to take whatever roles we take on, and we have to authorize ourselves to also drop it at the right time. Because a lot of times we start enjoying a certain role because it gives us a sense of comfort or control, and in the process we never drop it, whether it may be totally out of context. And then we get into what we call our habits, and then those habits become very not useful.
But the set pattern that you get day to day, like from morning till night, that thing practically gets repeated daily in life. And then you are in that comfort zone. So you don't want to change. You can't even think of changing, it just happens.
And that was the point of, that was the point of...
Now that you made aware, I realize that it's just a set pattern, I'm just flowing with it.
Yes.
And I'm so much in that comfort zone, I don't want to come out of it.
Yeah.
Then what next? Then I remain...
But it makes relationships so dysfunctional and so not meaningful. Because I operate out of a pattern. I'm not operating as a human being who's present there. I'm operating as somebody who's programmed to operate in a certain way. And therefore, where is the authenticity? Where am I being true, one, to myself, and two, to the other person? Or to the organization, or whatever is it that I'm in a relationship with? Where is the truth in that situation? If I'm simply operating out of habit, then I may as well be a robot. I don't have to be.
Because it happened yesterday in the meeting, I was just like that robo you said, okay, chalega. Like, couldn't change myself to that the situation. That's why I realized it's necessary.
So we spoke about that idea of role taking and how do we take on certain default roles, and how it's important to shift, become conscious of it first and then shift if necessary, and very importantly drop.
There's just a fear that what they think of me, I'm only making a noise and criticizing or finding faults with them. Then
Yes. So one of the elements that we spoke about that impedes role taking is that there is a self-image. There's a fear. What will others think of me if I suddenly shift my role?
Right.
Because there is a
Not
comfort with the
working
established role.
If it is not working, one needs to shift. If it's not working, one needs to shift.
Oh yes, one needs to. But there is a lot of fear sometimes. Sometimes we live with the discomfort because there is a fear. It paralyzes us. And it's almost, it brings there is almost a physical reaction. The body goes into a state of freeze with that fear. And that trauma lives on.
So how to come out of it?
Yes.
I want to
Especially in organization, you can see means many times people even they not want to do, they go with that.
Yeah.
Means to please or the other person.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not listen also.
But then look at what happens to the organizations and to the people, right? I mean, somewhere
Not
there is
growing.
attrition, they don't grow, they're not happy.
Not grow.
Right? So
Or their
it becomes important to do
performer
it.
attitude is mostly organization. If you say they have this performer attitude, and that
Some people do, not everybody.
though if you see no top, see generally what happens the top their motto is why they have come together, growth,
Yeah.
right? And many times this decision comes from upper side how to grow,
Yeah.
not from downside what changes to be made.
Yes.
That's why most time it don't work as.
Yeah. Sometimes people carry the performer role in an organization. A lot of times people simply carry the role of a contributor. So they contribute simply by saying yes. Which may not be functional.
Where organization that is allowed, like in Walt Disney, the example there is that he used to have a board. And he used to, whatever people you feel you write, means even a person who is just taking this low in the organization, he can write about means whatever work they are doing is his opinion.
Yeah.
Means it's autobiography test showed. Like so many times the person is expressed heard. Like so that it's a different thing. You are hard and
So
sometimes
it
you
is
get
an encouragement to say play different roles.
you get feedback also and you get ideas also. Many times because sometimes it happens the film people makes the film huge budget and think we're very successful and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because the idea not met, it's not grounded somewhere.
Yeah. So yes, some of our environments can be conducive to role taking in a conscious way, in the sense we may be allowed the freedom to be whatever is it that we want to be without the self-image getting hurt, but sometimes not. And yet, even if it's not, it is still our responsibility to stay conscious of it and work with it. So to answer you, I've covered a little bit of that earlier, so I'll go back to that post the talk. But yes, how do I shift? It's a matter of first identifying what do I take on as a default role. Right? Am I usually an observer? I say, all right, let life goes on, let it go on. If that's a stance I take, then chances are I take that stance in every area of my life. Does it work? If not, what are the different roles I need to take on in different spaces in my life? Think of it in a very simple way. If there are, let's say, 3 rooms in my house, there's a drawing room, there's a kitchen and a bedroom. What I do in the kitchen is not something that I do in a bedroom. I don't cook in the bedroom, right? Or I don't lounge around in the kitchen and read a book. I may do that in my drawing room. So, different contexts need me to take on different roles. In the kitchen, yes, I will need to make sure that I am in a controlling role. There is fire, there is safety involved, there are knives and all of that. So I need to take on a certain role. If I'm lounging around on the sofa, there is a very different context. So I can be in a very different role there. So different spaces and different times call for us to take roles differently, maybe playing the same roles. Right? So I may still be a daughter in the kitchen, I may be a daughter in the drawing room, daughter in the bedroom, but I will take the role of a daughter very differently in these 3 different spaces. So that's the consciousness that I'm inviting you to bring here by asking these very simple questions. The first question was about authorization, in that do I authorize myself to take on roles in a conscious way? If not, what is the impact? And secondly, do I drop roles in a conscious way? And if not, what is the impact? If I carry roles across thresholds, what's the impact of it? So that's what I leave you with. Here's a quote from the actress Eliza Dushku. She talks of how, as an actress, she plays different roles in different movies and serials every day. And she talks of while you're playing all these different roles, at some point, parallelly you're also trying to figure out who am I. I am beyond the role that I play. While she's talking of roles in a movie or in a serial, it's the same for us. Who am I beyond being this mother, wife, daughter, child, all of that? And what is that true, authentic self? And what else can that true, authentic self do in each of these different spaces? Once that self-awareness comes into effect, then we really start seeing who we are. Then we really expand. And that's the, in a way, that for me, that's the spiritual idea of expansion. Can I be all that I can be beyond my definition of personality? So it's a very simple psychological thing that can take on a very different dimension if used well. So that's what I had to share today.
Excellent.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank
Drop
you.
the role like